The Brooklyn Bridge killed its own creator before a single stone was laid. Then, inside pressurized chambers beneath the East River where temperatures reached 80 degrees, it gave birth to a disease no doctor had ever seen. It would cripple the man who built it and nearly erase the woman who saved it. The curse began with a single misstep on a summer afternoon in 1869. On June the 28th, 1869, John Roebling stood at the edge of the East River, eyes fixed on the future. He was 63, a man who had spent decades bending iron and vision to his will. A ferry drifted in too close, its hull grinding against the timber pilings where Roebling took his measurements. In an instant, the force crushed the toes of his right foot, bone splintered, flesh torn, nerves exposed. The pain must have been blinding. 2 doctors arrived and, with no time for ether, sawed away the ruined toes while Roebling remained fully conscious. Blood soaked the boards, and the wound was left raw and open to the summer air. Roebling sent the surgeons away. He trusted water more than medicine, insisting the wound be bathed day and night in a steady stream from a nearby well. He believed in hydrotherapy, convinced that purity and flow could wash away death. Instead, the water carried invisible spores deep into the exposed tissue. Within days, the stump blackened and swelled. Fever set in, then chills, then a creeping rigidity that locked his jaw and twisted his muscles into knots. Family letters describe the relentless agony, the stench of infection, the way he drifted in and out of delirium. He died on July 22nd, 1869, just 3 weeks after the accident. The official cause, tetanus. The New York Times called it a paralytic disorder, but the reality was more brutal. His body seized by a disease that had no name in engineering, only in medicine and mourning. The bridge had claimed its first victim before a single stone rose from the river. In the wake of his death, public tributes poured in, but the work he began now hung in the balance, waiting for someone to step into the shadow he left behind. Washington Roebling was 32 when he stepped into the void left by his father. He wore the scars of war, veteran of Gettysburg, survivor of the Siege of Petersburg, yet nothing in his military record compared to the trial that awaited him beneath the East River. He had studied in Europe, watching French and Belgian engineers sink bridges on columns of compressed air. Now, in January 1870, he ordered the first stone for the Brooklyn Tower to be laid and committed to a method as untested as it was unforgiving, the pneumatic caisson. The caissons were not just engineering marvels. They were vast wooden boxes, sealed tight, sunk into the riverbed, and held dry by air, pumped at crushing pressure. Men entered through hissing airlocks, descending into a world where every breath was thick with humidity, and the air pressed in from all sides. At 44.5 feet below water on the Brooklyn side, and 78.5 feet on the Manhattan side, the weight of the river was held at bay only by the relentless thrum of the compressors. Inside, the temperature hovered near 80 degrees. Sweat pooled on the floorboards. The roar of machinery never ceased. Every surface dripped. The men, most recent immigrants, labored for hours in this half-lit underworld, digging, shoveling, and fighting the river's slow, constant push. Washington worked alongside them, descending into the caisson's belly, breathing the same hot, stale air. The deeper the chamber sank, the more the walls seemed to close in. Each foot gained beneath the river came at a cost measured in blood, exhaustion, and something new, an invisible threat waiting in the pressure that no engineer yet understood. The first cases arrived at Brooklyn Hospital in the winter of 1871, men crawling or carried from the caissons, bodies twisted with pain, joints locked, skin cold and slick with sweat. Some could not stand upright, others screamed when touched, their backs arched in an unnatural curve. The workers called it the bends, a name that stuck because it described the shape their bodies took as the agony set in. No one understood what was happening. One by one, labourers who had seemed healthy at the start of their shift would stagger out of the airlocks, collapse on the ground, and lose the ability to move their arms or legs. Sometimes the pain faded after hours. Sometimes it ended in paralysis or a slow, suffocating death. Dr. Andrew Smith, a physician with a steady hand and a scientist's curiosity, began to keep careful notes. He logged 110 cases in his ledger. In the Medical Gazette of 1873, he gave the horror a name: caisson disease. Smith watched for patterns. The deeper the caisson, the more severe the symptoms. The longer the shift, the greater the risk. He noticed that the disease struck hardest after a rapid return to normal air. The men who rushed up the ladders suffered the worst. Inside their bodies, something invisible was at work. Smith suspected it was the air itself, turning against them. He wrote that nitrogen dissolved under pressure deep below the river, escaped in bubbles when the pressure dropped, flooding the blood like poison. The men's pain, the paralysis, the deaths, they were all the result of this unseen sabotage. There was no cure. Smith could only document, observe, and warn. Official reports described the suffering in clinical terms, but the reality was a new kind of workplace terror. The bridge was inventing a sickness even as it rose, and the toll was only beginning to be understood. The name of John Myers appears in the payroll ledger for April 22, 1872, with a final note that reads, "Deceased caisson disease." He was the first to die, but not the last. In the months that followed, the ledgers filled with similar entries, each one a quiet erasure. Daniel Reardon, Patrick Mackay, dozens more, most of them Irish or German immigrants, hired for $2 a day, a wage that barely kept their families fed, let alone safe. They entered the caissons in the dark, worked 12-hour shifts, and emerged changed or never emerged at all. The official counts never agreed. Some historians, trawling through hospital admissions and coroner's files, tally at least 20 dead. Others, combing through payrolls and burial records, insist the true number was closer to 40. The bridge company never published a full list. Names vanished in the gaps between pay periods and hospital logs. For every man who died in a hospital bed, another simply failed to return for his next shift. His absence noted only as a missing day's wage. The men who survived the caissons often did so at a terrible cost. Chronic pain, twisted limbs, a life narrowed by paralysis. There was no compensation, no insurance, no memorial. Their families crowded into tenements, mourning in silence while the city above celebrated the bridge's rise. The managers, faced with mounting casualties and desperate to keep the project moving, debated whether to slow the work or continue at full pace. Washington Roebling, now responsible for every life beneath the river, read Dr. Smith's warnings and weighed them against the relentless pressure from the bridge's board. Schedules were adjusted, decompression stops lengthened by a few minutes, but the deaths continued. Every decision became a calculation, time versus safety, ambition versus flesh. The bridge's progress was measured not just in feet of granite and steel, but in the number of men it consumed. Washington Roebling's hands began to tremble in the spring of 1872. At first, it was a stiffness in the joints, a pain that crept from his knees to his spine, then a wave of nausea and blinding headaches that left him bedridden for days. The doctors called it caisson disease, but the name offered no comfort. By early summer, he could no longer stand. His body locked by invisible pressure, nerves shot through with pain. For 4 months, he dictated orders from a darkened room, his voice thin but unwavering, filling notebooks with calculations and instructions. A brass telescope stood by his bedside, aimed at the rising towers across the river. Through its lens, he watched the bridge inch skyward, powerless to set foot on its stones. Each day, his world shrank to a bed, a window, and the distant glint of cable in the morning sun. On the morning of May 24th, 1883, Emily Warren Roebling stepped onto the bridge before the city's dignitaries and crowds, carrying a rooster beneath her arm, a symbol of victory. She walked the full span, the first to do so, while her husband watched from a window across the river, too frail to stand. Newspapers recorded her name, alongside those of mayors and governors. calling her the woman who finished what death and disease tried to halt. She spoke of perseverance and ingenuity, her voice steady above the river's current. For a moment, the bridge shimmered with promise. Yet beneath the celebration, the weight of loss lingered in every stone and cable, a silent warning that the bridge was open, but never truly safe. 5 days after the grand opening, a surge of bodies pressed against a narrow staircase left 12 dead, and dozens more trampled. Their names entered in the coroner's ledger as casualties of celebration. The following year, P.T. Barnum led 21 elephants across the span, a spectacle meant to banish fear and prove the bridge's strength. Yet beneath the stone arches, the facts remain: a 1,595-foot span, built at a cost of $15.5 million. Its cables compromised by wire fraud, its safety margin halved and now carrying 120,000 vehicles every day. The bridge endures, but the toll, etched in ledgers and lost in the crowd, never truly fades. Every day, thousands cross a bridge built from agony and obsession, unaware that its arches once echoed with fevers, paralysis, and silent grief. The Brooklyn Bridge stands as a monument, not just to progress, but to the bodies it claimed and the shadows it still casts. What do you carry across?